He once stood at the edge of an abyss, staring into the void with an unsettling thought. Perhaps death was not an end, but a liberation, a release from the crushing weight of a life devoid of meaning. Yet, something within him refused to give way. An invisible thread held him back, urging him not to surrender. Instead of succumbing to despair, Tolstoy took a radical step inward. If the logic of science and the reasoning of philosophy could not provide answers, then perhaps the answers lay somewhere beyond their reach. He turned his gaze outward, toward the lives of others, and what he observed both humbled and puzzled him. Around him were people, peasants, laborers, men and women of no great worldly status, who bore the trials of existence with a quiet dignity. Despite poverty, toil, and a lack of education, they carried within themselves an inner peace, a serenity that he, with all his privilege and intellect, could not grasp. Tolstoy's envy of their calm was not born of bitterness, but of genuine curiosity. How could they endure life's hardships without succumbing to the same existential despair that plagued him? What secret did they hold? What gave their lives the sense of purpose that his so sorely lacked? The answer seemed to lie in their faith, a faith unshaken by doubt or reason. While he wrestled with questions too large to answer, these humble souls trusted in something far greater than themselves. This realization was a spark, igniting a question that would guide the next chapter of his life. Could faith, not reason, hold the answers he so desperately sought? For Tolstoy, a man steeped in rationality and skeptical of all that could not be proven, this was no small shift. To accept that meaning might exist beyond the boundaries of logic was to challenge the very foundation of his worldview. Yet, the pull toward this possibility was irresistible. And so, he embarked on a journey, a quest not merely to understand, but to transform. He began by studying the world's religions, seeking a common thread that might tie them to some universal truth. The teachings of Christ in the Gospels intrigued him, especially their emphasis on love, compassion, and humility. But he did not stop there. He explored Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Taoism, searching for insights that resonated with his own restless heart. In these diverse traditions, he found recurring themes: the need to transcend the self, to live in harmony with something greater, and to detach from material desires. Buddhism's teachings on suffering, rooted in attachment and the renunciation of cravings, struck a particularly profound chord. Could it be, he wondered, that the peace he sought had been within his reach all along, obscured only by his relentless pursuit of worldly and intellectual accomplishments? Yet, even as he found inspiration in these teachings, doubts lingered. Was faith merely a refuge for the weak, a comforting illusion, a balm for those unable to face the void? Tolstoy, ever the skeptic, could not accept belief without proof. He needed to know, not simply to hope, that life held meaning. This tension between reason and faith became the central struggle of his life. The scientist in him recoiled at the idea of embracing what could not be seen or measured, while the seeker in him yearned for something beyond the confines of logic. It was a battle of two worlds, one rooted in the observable, the other in the transcendent. And it led him to a stark choice: to accept life as meaningless and face despair, or to find a new way of seeing the world, one that offered hope and purpose. In the end, Tolstoy chose hope. But this decision was not the simple act of faith it might appear. It was an experiment. He sought to live the teachings he had studied, to embody the principles of simplicity, humility, and love. He renounced many of his aristocratic privileges, simplified his lifestyle, and dedicated himself to the service of others. To his surprise, this experiment transformed him. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy that had eluded him in all his years of searching. It was not the peace of having all the answers, but the peace of no longer needing them. Tolstoy's journey reminds us that meaning may not lie in finding definitive answers, but in the way we choose to live. In the end, the greatest truths might not be those we understand, but those we live. But Tolstoy's journey was far from over. The peace he found was not a destination, but a fragile flame, one that needed nurturing and protection. He began to see that meaning was not something external, waiting to be discovered in books or doctrines. It was something cultivated, something lived, something that emerged in the space between action and reflection. As he immersed himself in this new way of life, Tolstoy came to understand that simplicity was not a limitation, but a gateway. By shedding the distractions of wealth and status, he found room to connect with the essence of existence, the quiet, unadorned moments that so often pass unnoticed. A sunrise breaking over a field, the laughter of a child, the toil of a farmer's hands, these became the sacred textures of his life. Yet, even in his newfound simplicity, Tolstoy remained deeply reflective. He continued to grapple with the paradoxes of existence. How could such beauty coexist with suffering? How could one reconcile faith in a higher order with the chaos and cruelty of the world? These questions no longer paralyzed him, but fueled his resolve to live authentically, to strive toward a life of integrity and compassion. One of the most profound lessons he learned was that the search for meaning is not a solitary endeavor. Tolstoy began to see himself not as an isolated seeker, but as part of a vast, interconnected web of humanity. The peasants he once observed were no longer just subjects of his curiosity. They became his teachers, his companions in the shared human struggle. Their faith, their resilience, and their humility illuminated a truth that transcended words. That life's deepest meaning is found in our relationships, with one another, with the earth, and with the divine, however one chooses to define it. This realization brought Tolstoy to a new understanding of faith. It was not a blind adherence to dogma or ritual, but an active, dynamic force. A faith that grew through acts of kindness, through service, and through the courage to embrace life in all its contradictions. Faith, he discovered, was not a final answer, but a practice, a daily recommitment to hope and love, even in the face of doubt. Tolstoy's transformation was not without its challenges. He faced criticism from his peers, alienation from his social class, and even estrangement within his family. But these sacrifices, painful as they were, became part of his journey. They taught him that true meaning requires courage, the courage to let go of what no longer serves, to question the comfortable illusions we cling to, and to embrace the vulnerability of living with an open heart. As his life neared its end, Tolstoy reflected on the path he had walked. He did not see himself as a man who had arrived at ultimate truth, but as one who had dared to ask the questions that mattered most. His legacy was not a set of definitive answers, but a testament to the value of the search itself. What then, can we learn from Tolstoy's journey? Perhaps it is this: that the meaning of life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a melody to be played, a rhythm found in the acts of love, in the pursuit of justice, in the willingness to see beauty in the mundane. And in the end, it is not the certainty of answers that sustains us, but the grace of living as if the questions themselves are worth everything. Tolstoy's journey was far from over. The peace he found was not a destination, but a fragile flame, one that required nurturing and constant attention. He came to understand that spirituality is not a fixed, final truth to be discovered, but a living process, something that must be woven into the fabric of daily life, continuously renewed. Faith, he realized, is not something you simply accept as a ready-made answer. It must be lived, embodied in every act, in every choice, and sometimes in the silence between those acts. His view of life grew even more radical. He increasingly understood that true peace and meaning could not exist if people continued to suffer needlessly, and that, perhaps, the path to inner salvation lay in service to others. This was not just an act of charity or kindness, it was a necessity, a moral obligation. The abandonment of selfish desires and material indulgence became not only a spiritual duty, but a matter of personal well-being. To care for others was, in fact, to care for oneself. It was a realization that shifted his understanding of what it meant to be truly free. He saw that the majority of people living in hardship often lacked the opportunities for self-exploration that he had. The simple, often illiterate peasants whom he once observed, living without luxury or comfort, found their strength in a deeply held faith. For them, religion was not a philosophical pursuit, but a vital lifeline, something practical and alive. They did not ponder abstract concepts of existence. They simply lived, trusting in a higher order that gave their lives meaning. Tolstoy came to see that there was a profound strength in the simplicity of their lives. It wasn't in avoiding the suffering or ignoring the hardships of their reality, but in their capacity to endure and find meaning in the very act of living. The more he reflected on their way of life, the more he recognized that his own struggles, so deeply intellectual and philosophical, were but a small part of the human condition. For most, life did not require deep intellectual answers. It required something more fundamental, an acceptance of life's impermanence and a quiet faith in something greater. He realized that faith was not merely the realm of the unthinking or the uneducated. It was a living, breathing force that flowed through people who knew how to surrender their need for control and certainty. It wasn't about answers, but about trust. And this trust was not blind. It was rooted in experience, in the lived truth of day-to-day existence. As his life transformed, so did his understanding of what faith truly was. Faith was not an adherence to dogma or religious rituals. It was a dynamic practice, a way of being in the world that transcended words and rituals. Faith was living with love, with compassion, and with a deep sense of service toward others. It was about finding peace in the very act of surrendering one's ego, of living in harmony with the world and those around us. Tolstoy's views became more and more radical, and the changes he made in his life reflected this shift. He gave up much of the comfort and privilege he had known and began to live simply, dedicating himself to helping others. In this humble existence, he found a profound peace, one that had eluded him for much of his life. It was a peace that came not from intellectual understanding, but from the daily practice of kindness and service. But even in this newfound simplicity, Tolstoy never ceased to reflect. The questions that had once haunted him, the existential struggles, still lingered, but now, instead of paralyzing him, they pushed him forward. He sought not answers, but a way of living that could embrace both joy and suffering, love and pain. He began to understand that the meaning of life was not something to be figured out, but something to be experienced, moment by moment. Perhaps the greatest lesson he learned was that we do not find meaning in the grand, intellectual pursuits, but in the small, everyday acts of love, kindness, and humility. The true purpose of life is not something we can logically prove or explain. It is something we live, something we embody in our relationships with others, in our capacity to care, to serve, and to love. As his life drew to a close, Tolstoy did not see himself as someone who had arrived at ultimate answers. Instead, he was a man who had dared to ask the most important questions, and in that search, he had found peace. His legacy was not in the answers he discovered, but in the journey itself, the unrelenting pursuit of truth, not as a final destination, but as a living, breathing process. What can we learn from Tolstoy's life? Perhaps it is this: that the meaning of life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a rhythm to be played. It is found in the simple, unremarkable moments, those everyday acts of connection, compassion, and kindness. And in the end, the greatest peace we can find is not in having all the answers, but in living with the questions, in embracing life fully and without fear. Tolstoy's transformation was a slow, deliberate process. As he shed the layers of intellectual pride, skepticism, and existential despair that had once defined his worldview, he became more attuned to the quiet, almost imperceptible truths that surround us. He realized that the greatest truths are not spoken in grand speeches or written in dense texts. They emerge quietly, in the spaces between words, in the rhythm of life itself. This shift in perception was not an epiphany. It was a gradual awakening to the profound simplicity that underpins existence. And it was through this simplicity that Tolstoy began to see the deeper layers of reality. As he moved away from the intellectual life, from the constant need to analyze, dissect, and understand, he found himself drawn into the essence of things, the ordinary, the everyday, and the unseen. The sound of a farmer's plow scraping against the earth, the simple act of helping a neighbor, the laughter of children, the quiet hum of the wind, all of these small moments, once overlooked, became portals to the divine. Tolstoy's life, once filled with grandeur, complexity, and intellectual pursuits, now became a quiet search for the sacred in the mundane. He began to understand that it was not in escaping the world, nor in intellectualizing life, that one could find meaning. Rather, meaning was found in being present, in being fully immersed in the moment, in connecting deeply with the people and the world around us. The complexity of his earlier thoughts and worries started to dissolve into the simplicity of living a life based on love, faith, and kindness. The world he had once viewed through the lens of philosophy, science, and reason was now seen through the lens of compassion. The peasants he once observed from a distance, whose lives had seemed harsh and devoid of meaning, now seemed to embody a profound, unspoken wisdom. They were not intellectuals. They were not scholars. Yet, they seemed to know something Tolstoy himself had failed to grasp until now. Something deeper, something more profound than abstract knowledge. The meaning of life was lived, not thought about. It was embodied in actions, not ideas. Tolstoy's observations of their simple faith were a revelation. For him, it wasn't the specific doctrines or rituals that mattered. It was the way in which faith gave people peace. It was the quiet confidence with which they lived, knowing that life had a meaning, even if that meaning was not always clear. Faith, for these people, was not about certainty or dogma. It was about trust. They trusted that life, in all its messiness, in all its suffering, had purpose. They had found a meaning not through intellectual pursuit, but through a deep, intuitive understanding of life's mysteries. This realization became a pivotal moment in Tolstoy's search. He began to understand that meaning was not something to be argued or proven. It was something to be experienced. It was something to be lived through every action, every choice, every encounter. He no longer saw faith as something that could be reduced to logic or reason. Faith, to him, became an active, living force. A force that guided his decisions, shaped his interactions, and gave him strength to endure life's challenges. As he began to embrace this new way of being, Tolstoy's life became simpler, quieter, more focused on the essential. He gave up many of the privileges and comforts that had once defined him. He renounced his aristocratic lifestyle, and instead, he dedicated himself to the service of others. His days, once filled with intellectual pursuits and leisure, now revolved around acts of kindness, compassion, and charity. In this newfound simplicity, Tolstoy felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of intellectual certainty, nor the peace of resolving all his doubts. It was a deeper, more subtle peace, one that came from surrendering his need for control, from accepting life as it was, without the constant urge to define or understand it. It was a peace that came from knowing that he was living authentically, in harmony with the world around him. But this peace was not without its challenges. Tolstoy's new way of life, though deeply fulfilling, was also fraught with difficulty. He faced criticism, alienation, and even betrayal. His decision to live more humbly, to renounce his wealth and position, made him an outcast in his own social circle. He was scorned by those who saw his actions as foolish or naive. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, Tolstoy felt a growing sense of alignment with his inner truth. The path he had chosen was not easy, but it was real. It was a path of integrity, a path that required courage, vulnerability, and an unshakable commitment to the values he had come to embrace. What's more, he realized that this path was not just for him, it was for everyone. It was a way of living that transcended social status, intellectual ability, or material wealth. It was a universal truth that could be embraced by all. His growing understanding of faith, of service, and of love was not a personal belief to be kept hidden. It was a message to the world. And in this message, Tolstoy found his true purpose. It was not to be a great thinker or writer, but to be a witness to the simple, transformative power of love and compassion. As Tolstoy continued on his path, he recognized that life itself was a process of constant growth and transformation. There was no final answer, no ultimate resolution. The questions he had once asked remained, but now they did not paralyze him. Instead, they became invitations, invites to continue growing, to continue seeking, to continue learning. Life, he realized, was not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. In the end, Tolstoy's legacy is not one of definitive answers. It is a legacy of searching, of questioning, of being rather than knowing. His life is a testament to the power of embracing the unknown, to the importance of living authentically, and to the belief that the true meaning of life lies not in the things we achieve, but in the way we live each moment. The question then is not, what is the meaning of life, but rather, how can we live it fully, with love, with compassion, and with an open heart? Tolstoy's journey is a reminder that the search itself is sacred, and that in the search we find the essence of what it means to be human. Tolstoy's transformation, though profound, was not sudden. He began to see that the search for meaning was not about conquering life's complexities with the intellect, but about surrendering to the simplicity of existence. In the quiet, in the mundane, in the suffering, he found fragments of something pure, something that transcended the noise of intellectual arguments and philosophical debates. He began to understand what he had once rejected, the profound beauty of living a life of faith, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived, breathing force. His greatest work, War and Peace, gives us glimpses of this realization, how human life is often shaped by forces greater than reason or will. The historical events that unfold in the novel are driven not by intellectual calculation, but by the unpredictable interplay of faith, chance, and human nature. In one of his most moving passages, Tolstoy writes, "The one thing that could be relied upon in life was the certainty that everything was in flux. It was precisely the inexorable and unpredictable flow of life that gave it meaning." War and Peace, Part 3, Chapter 8. This understanding of life's unpredictable nature led Tolstoy to realize that the search for meaning was not about creating a system of thought that could explain everything. It was not about finding a final, absolute answer that could definitively solve the puzzle of existence. Rather, meaning was found in accepting the flow of life, embracing its uncertainties and contradictions, and finding peace in the process. As he continued his journey, Tolstoy's observations of everyday life deepened. The peasants he had once viewed with pity and condescension now embodied a quiet wisdom that he could not ignore. He began to see that their simple, humble lives were not devoid of meaning. They were full of it. The simplicity of their existence, rooted in faith and the basic acts of survival, held the answer to the very questions that had tormented him. In Confession, Tolstoy writes with raw honesty about his inner turmoil. "I wanted to find the meaning of life. I could not find it in science, for science could only explain the how of things, but not the why. I could not find it in philosophy, for it gave me only intellectual comfort, but no real peace. It was only in the simple faith of the peasants that I found the meaning I had been searching for." Confession, Chapter 13. This passage is critical in understanding the shift in Tolstoy's thinking. It was not merely that he was drawn to religion or spirituality, but that he recognized a certain purity in the lives of those who embraced faith without the need for intellectual justification. They were not burdened by the constant need to understand everything, and yet they seem to carry a profound peace. They lived their lives on a simple premise that there was a meaning to be found in faith, in love, and in service to others. This became the core of Tolstoy's new worldview. He began to see that the meaning of life was not something to be intellectually achieved. It was something to be lived day by day through love and humility. Tolstoy's struggle to reconcile reason with faith was an ongoing battle, but it was one that gradually resolved itself. In his reflections, he writes, "For me, faith is not belief in dogma or the acceptance of religious authority. It is a living force that permeates every aspect of life, something that is experienced through action, through kindness, through love. It is not an idea to be argued, but a truth to be lived." A confession. This was Tolstoy's greatest revelation. Faith was not an abstract philosophy. It was the very foundation of human life. It was the quiet, unspoken force that connected all beings, the invisible thread that bound people together in their shared humanity. It was present in the simplest acts of compassion, in the humility of service, in the willingness to surrender one's ego for the sake of others. Tolstoy's understanding of the importance of service deepened as he lived out these principles. In the latter part of his life, he wrote extensively on the moral imperative to serve the poor and the oppressed. He saw materialism as a distraction from the true meaning of life, a trap that caused human beings to focus on accumulating wealth, power, and status, rather than on the development of the soul. He writes in "The Kingdom of God is within you." The true kingdom of God does not lie in outward forms, in laws, or in structures of power. It lies in the hearts of those who live for others, to serve, to love, to give. This is the path to true freedom. The kingdom of God is within you, chapter 8. His journey to the realization that the essence of life lay in selfless service is echoed in his later writings and in his personal life. He began to simplify his life, to live in closer connection with the people he had once distanced himself from. He renounced his wealth, his aristocratic privileges, and dedicated himself to helping the peasantry, the very people he had once believed to be trapped in ignorance and suffering. The irony, of course, was that they were the ones who had possessed the very peace that Tolstoy had so longed for. In the end, Tolstoy's greatest insight was that we must confront the reality of life as it is, with all its suffering, without trying to escape into the mind. It is not through intellectualizing our problems that we find peace, but through acceptance and surrender. To live in harmony with the world, to serve others, and to love selflessly, this is the meaning of life. His personal transformation is a powerful reminder that the search for meaning is not about escaping from the chaos of existence, but about embracing it fully. Tolstoy's own doubts, fears, and questions were never fully resolved, but it was precisely through his willingness to live with these uncertainties that he found peace. This is the essence of his legacy, not answers, but a deeper, more profound way of engaging with the world. As Tolstoy writes in Anna Karenina, "All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." While this passage refers to the complexities of human relationships, it also speaks to the core of the human experience, the individual struggle to find meaning. Every person's path to happiness, to peace, is unique. And yet, There is a universal truth at the heart of all human suffering, that in living fully and selflessly, we find the meaning we seek. And so, Tolstoy's journey did not end in intellectual triumph. It ended in surrender, in acceptance of life's uncertainties, and in the quiet, transformative power of love. The meaning of life is not something to be figured out. It is something to be lived, fully and without reservation. As Tolstoy's life drew to a close, he found solace in the realization that life itself, with all its contradictions, suffering, and beauty, is a journey of continuous transformation. His search for meaning had taken him through science, philosophy, and religion. But in the end, he discovered that no single path could offer him a complete answer. Instead, he embraced the journey itself, the process of becoming, of seeking, of questioning, and of living authentically. His transformation was not about finding a final truth that could be neatly wrapped up in a book or a doctrine. It was about living the truth that emerged in each moment, the truth of love, service, and faith. Tolstoy understood that life's meaning is not something to be acquired or possessed, but something to be lived, shared, and given. As he famously wrote in "The Kingdom of God is Within You," the essence of life is not in striving for success or knowledge, but in living with the awareness of the sacred in each moment. It is in love that we find true freedom. His life, with all its struggles and moments of doubt, became a testament to the power of living with an open heart. It is through this radical shift, away from intellectual certainty and towards compassionate action, that he not only transformed his own existence, but left an indelible mark on humanity. So, what can we take from Tolstoy's journey? Perhaps it's the reminder that meaning does not come from answers, but from our willingness to embrace the unknown with courage and love. The struggle for truth, for purpose, is universal. And while the path may not be clear, it is through our actions, through kindness, faith, and love, that we begin to uncover its deeper layers. Now I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Have you too found meaning in simplicity, in service, in love? How does Tolstoy's transformation resonate with your own experiences and struggles? Let's continue this conversation. Share your thoughts, your reflections, and your questions in the comments below. Thank you for watching and for joining me on this journey through Tolstoy's life. I appreciate your time and your willingness to dive deeper into these profound questions with me. Let's keep this conversation alive, because the search for meaning is not just one person's journey, but a collective experience we all share.